In today's lesson, we are going to be learning to identify and name some common 2D shapes. So we'll be looking at the names of all the 2D shapes that you would be expected to learn while in Key Stage 2, and we're going to think about how we can identify them and name them on site. This is part 1 of a 3-part series looking at 2D shapes. Here are the 2D shapes that you would be expected to learn the names of by the end of Key Stage 2. How many of them can you name now? Perhaps you'd like to pause the video and make a list of which shapes you already know the names of. And then as you unpause the video, we're going to go through the names of some of them and some tips and strategies to help you remember. So the first 3 shapes that we are looking at are probably quite familiar to you, and you may already know the names of these, but I want to explore the meaning behind the names. Now when we look at the first shape, hopefully you know that it is a triangle. And the prefix tri is directly linked to the fact that a triangle has 3 sides. So we can use the sides of a shape to help us name it. However, with the next 2 shapes, we can see that they both have 4 sides, yet they do look different. So while we can use the number of sides to help us with the name of a shape, it is not the only thing that helps us, but we will look at that a bit further in our further parts. In lesson 1, we are just going to look at some of the common shapes. Hopefully you know that the first one is a square. And that our third one is a rectangle, or you may hear of it as an oblong. Rectangle is the word that we more commonly hear. Now rectangle, triangle has got angle in it as well, and rectangle is just referring to the fact that it has 4 right angles. So a square is also a type of rectangle, but it's a special rectangle because it has 4 sides that are the same length. And we will talk more about the other properties of 2D shapes in our further lessons. But you should know already a triangle is a shape with 3 sides. So the tri part of our triangle helps us with that. Think of a tricycle or a tripod. They have a tricycle has 3 wheels and a tripod has 3 legs. We've got a square and then a rectangle. A rectangle has got 4 right angles, or an oblong. It's a rectangle which doesn't have 4 sides the same size. We've got 2 long sides and 2 shorter sides. Now when we move on to our next set of shapes, we're going to start thinking about our prefixes and how they match the number of sides. So with our first shape, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sides. This is called a pent, and I'm going to change the colour. Pentagon. Pent is related to 5. If we look back at Greek language, pent is 5. So anything which has pent in it, for example, a pentathlon. A pentathlon is an event it's an athletic event with 5 different sports in it. Like a triathlon has 3 sports in it. You can have a duathlon with 2 sports in it as well. Interestingly, the 2D shapes that we are looking at are all polygons. A polygon, poly means many and gon means angle. So we're looking at polygons. 2D shapes are shapes with many angles. Now a circle and a semicircle they're not polygons because they don't have straight sides. A polygon is any shape with straight sides and they have to have 3 or more sides. So we are looking at those shapes today. So let's have a look at our next shape. This has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is called a hex. And then again, we've got the agon. So the agon is related to the gon in polygons. It's referring to how many angles. So if we look at our pentagon, it's basically translated to 5 angles. Our hexagon is translated to 6 angles. So in the Greek language, pent was 5 and hex or hexa is 6. And in fact, we might want to include the penta and the hexa so that it's separated from our gon. Okay, so pent or penta both mean 5, hex or hexa both mean 6. Our gon is related to the angles in our polygons. So let's look at the next shape. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this one I find often causes some confusion. 7 is hepta. Heptagon. And our final one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And those colours. 8 is octagon. So the number of sides helps us to name them. Our penta, our hexa, our hepta and our octa all relate to numbers using the Greek language. So how I also might remember it is hex. It sounds a bit like 6, doesn't it? So we need to find other creative ways to help us remember. So hex, I know when I was learning the names of shapes when I was at school, I just remembered that hex sounds very similar to 6. Hept sounds, or I think about it like set, which is 7 in French. And September also used to be the 7th month. That's going to help us when we learn the shapes going forwards. Now, in the calendar, before the Romans added 2 extra months, January and February were added to the calendar. All the other months, there are only 10, from September, October, November, December, those months are actually linked to numbers and they're actually linked to our shapes as well. So September used to be the 7th month. It's now the 9th month. If you take January and February away, it used to be the 7th month. Sept is 7 in French. Hepta is very, very similar. So that's how I remember it. October is now the 10th month, but it used to be the 8th month. Oct also makes me think of octopus. Okay, so think about it any way you need to help you remember those prefixes and what they mean. Let's move on to our next set of shapes. So I'm going to label how many sides we've got. And finally, these will conclude all the shapes that you really need to know. Our 9-sided shape is called a nonagon. Actually, I'm just going to put in gon next to each one now, because they're all going to be called gons. They all end with gon. My 10-sided shape is called a decagon, and my 12-sided shape is called a dodecagon. Okay, so nonna, that is actually related to the number 9. Okay, so it sounds a bit like 9, doesn't it? Like hex sounds like 6, non sounds like 9, and November used to be the 9th month. It was the 9th month before January and February were added. Nonna in Greek was 9, means 9 angles. December used to be the 10th month before January and February were added. We could also think of decade. A decade is 10 years. So we want to be relating our word dec to 10. And dodec, well, we've got dec in it. We've got the 10. And do, we might want to think of duo. So de in French is 2. Or duo is 2. So it's almost like saying 2 and 10. So it's all about trying to make links with the prefixes and numbers. So let's recap and see what you can remember. So can you remember the names of these shapes? Have you learned any new shape names today? So let's think about it. Our first shape has 3 sides. If it has 3 sides, how is the number 3 going to help us remember the name? Think about what things relate to 3. So triple, tricycle, tripod, and we've got a triangle. Our second 2, hopefully you know the second shape. It's one of the shapes that you would learn first when you first go to nursery or are in reception. It's probably one of the most common shapes. They're both 4-sided, so they are actually both types of quadrilaterals, but that's for another lesson. They have special names. The first one is a square, so that's one that you need to become familiar with. And the second one is a rectangle or an oblong. Okay, what about our next shape? It's got 5 sides. What did 5 relate to? Did you find a way to remember the prefix for 5? It's a pentagon. So it's a way of remembering pent or penta. What does it mean? So a pentathlete or a pentathlon is an event with 5 separate racing events within it. What about the next one? It's got 6 sides. Which prefix related to the word 6? Now this one sounds very similar to 6. We know it's going to be a something agon. What was the word? What was the prefix that related to the word 6? Sounds like 6. It's hexagon. Sixagon, hexagon. 6 angles, hexagon. Okay, what about our 7th one? To help you with this, think about what is French for 7. And if we took January and February away, what would be our 7th month? And it's similar. So it isn't a septagon, it is a heptagon. Our next one has 8 sides. So for this one, you could use the month that used to be the 8th month in the year, if we took January and February away, or you could think of things that have 8. What word relates to 8? So think of an octopus, and it's an octagon. What about our shape with 9 sides? Can you remember what that is called? Now this one sounds very similar to 9. And it is also, think about what the 9th month of the year would be if we took January and February away. This one is a nonagon. For 10, we want to think of things linked to 10. So what do we call 10 years? And what would have been the 10th month of the year if we took away January and February? So we would have the prefix dec or deca. It's a decagon. And for our final one, our 12-sided shape, we simply need to know the name for the 10-sided shape, and we're going to add something which relates to 2. So it's like saying 2 and 10-sided shape. For 2, we want to think of duo or de in French for 2. And if we add that onto our decagon, we get a dodecagon. So hopefully you've got some tips today for helping you to remember the names of some common polygons. You will need to know the names of these shapes as you get to the end of Key Stage 2. So if you practice them now, you will be in good stead going forward. Now that we've learned some of the names of the shapes, could you find any of these shapes around your home? How many things could you find that are triangular or square? Are there any things in your house that are nonagons or decagons or dodecagons? So have a look around your house to see if you can find any of these shapes. Can you think about what is special about each shape? Is there anything else you notice about them? So maybe you could try drawing the shapes, or spend a bit of time having a look at them. There's loads of activities online where you can sort 2D shapes and play with 2D shapes. Could you describe one of these shapes to someone else without telling them how many sides there were? For example, if I wanted to describe a triangle to someone, how might I describe it to them without telling them it has 3 sides? Or if I wanted to describe a hexagon, how might I describe that to someone without telling them it has 6 sides? So spend a bit of time exploring and thinking about the other properties of shapes, and we will in part 2 be talking a lot more about the different properties of shapes that we can also use to help us to identify them, and thinking about what is special and unique about each of those polygons. If you are in Year 6, on our app there are 2 lessons, learning objectives, which are based around properties of shape. On the screen is just one of those learning objectives, but you can see how many different activities there are. And in terms of past SATs questions, there have been tons of questions linked to properties of shape. So it's really important. Now it covers 2D and 3D shapes. And there's also another objective where you're expected to be able to draw 2D shapes. So download the app from the Apple or Android store. It's free to download and $4.99 a month to access all areas after you've trialed 6 free ones, and you'll be able to engage with lots more lessons looking a bit further into the properties of 2D and 3D shapes.